The night the Alpha King said he would ruin me forever. My hands were shaking so badly I had to lace them together just to keep from falling apart. Alina, he had said, like my name already belonged to him, like it had always waited on his tongue for this exact moment. I stood in the shadowed archway of the royal hall, heart slamming against my ribs as the heat of 1,000 eyes pressed into my skin. Chandeliers glowed overhead, casting gold light across marble floors and velvet banners. But none of it softened the truth clawing its way up my throat. I didn't belong here. An Omega like me had no place in a palace built for power, dominance, and bloodline politics. And yet the Alpha King was walking toward me. Lucian Vale moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never once doubted his right to command a room. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black tailored to his body like it had been sewn onto him. He didn't rush. He never had to. The court parted instinctively, nobles lowering their gazes as he passed. His presence pressed down on the air, thick and electric, making my pulse stutter. When he stopped in front of me, the world shrank to the space between us. You're trembling, he murmured, voice low, almost gentle, his eyes steel gray and sharp flicked to my hands. Are you afraid of me? I swallowed. I'm afraid of what you want. A slow smile touched his mouth, not cruel, not kind, curious, dangerous. Good, he said softly. That means you understand the stakes. The court murmured behind us, whispers hissing like sparks on stone. Everyone knew why I was here. An unbonded Omega from a fallen house, summoned under the guise of service but really offered as a solution, a bargaining chip, a body to stabilize an Alpha King whose temper and dominance were starting to fracture alliances. I had sworn I wouldn't let myself be reduced to that. Lucian leaned closer, his scent clean sharp, impossibly warm wrapping around me. My knees almost buckled. If you spend one night with me, he said quietly, so only I could hear, you'd remember it for the rest of your life. Anger flared through the fear. You think I'm that easy to buy? His gaze held mine, unflinching. No, I think you're strong enough to survive me. Something in his tone made my chest ache. They escorted me to the West Wing that night, past towering windows and corridors that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. My room was too beautiful, too luxurious for a prisoner's quarters, which somehow made it worse. Silk sheets, a fire already burning, a tray of untouched food. I didn't sleep. Every sound made my heart leap. Every flicker of shadow made me think of Himtho's steady eyes. That quiet promise threaded with warning. When the door finally opened. It wasn't with force. Lucian stepped inside like he belonged there, like he belonged everywhere. I won't touch you unless you say yes, he said, closing the door behind him. But don't mistake restraint for weakness, Alina. I laughed softly, bitter. You summoned me here. You hold all the power. His expression darkened. Power doesn't mean I get what I want. Silence stretched between us, thick with things unsaid. Over the days that followed, he kept his distance. Too much distance. He summoned me for meals, for walks through the palace gardens, for quiet evenings where we talked of nothing and everything. He listened, really listened. When I spoke about my mother's death, about the house that had cast me out, his jaw tightened like he carried the weight with me. The slow burn was worse than any demand could have been. I started noticing the way his hand hovered near my back when we walked through crowded halls, never touching. The way his voice softened when he said my name. The way his control frayed when other alphas looked at me for too long. And I hated myself for wanting him. The night everything changed. A storm rolled in from the coast, thunder rattling the windows. Lucian found me in the library, pacing, nerves stretched thin. You should leave. I said, if you don't, I might say yes just to make this stop. His gaze darkened. And if you do, then I won't survive losing you. The confession hung between us. Raw and terrifying. He crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped inches away, breathing hard. Alina, he said, voice breaking for the first time, I never intended to claim you. My heart dropped. What? You were supposed to be a distraction. A decoy. The council believes I need an Omega to control me. They don't know, I've already been bonded once. The twist landed like a blow. He told me then about the betrayal. The bond broken by treachery, the way it had nearly destroyed him, about how bringing me here wasn't about possession, but protection, because someone was trying to use me to control him. And I realized the truth all at once. I wasn't the prize. I was the target. Asterisk from that moment on, everything shifted. We weren't circling each other anymore, we were standing back to back. Trust grew in stolen glances and whispered plans. When danger finally struck, it was Lucien who took the blade meant for me, and it was my hands shaking as I pressed against his wound, begging him to stay. Asterisk, I told you, he whispered, blood on his lips, smiling faintly. You'd remember me. Asterisk tears blurred my vision. Don't you dare make this the only night I get it. He lived. The bond that formed between us wasn't forced, wasn't commanded, it was chosen. Slow, earned, real. Asterisk, months later, as dawn broke over the palace and I stood beside him as queen, his hand warm in mine, I realized something that made me smile through happy tears. Asterisk, he had been right. Asterisk, I would remember that night for the rest of my life. But not because he had claimed me. Because he had loved me. Asterisk. The weeks after the attempted assassination passed in a strange, suspended quiet, as if the palace itself were holding its breath. Asterisk, Lucien healed quickly, the physicians said, shaken by the speed with which his strength returned. But I knew why. The bond had begun forming the moment he chose me over his own life. It wasn't complete yet, not sealed in ceremony or blood, but it hummed between us like a living thing, warm and steady, stitching him back together. Asterisk, he tried to hide the lingering pain. I saw it anyway. Asterisk, you don't have to sit with me every night, he said once, voice gentle but tired, as I settled into the chair beside his bed. Asterisk, I want to, I replied, not looking up from the book I wasn't really reading, and you don't get to decide that for me. Asterisk, a corner of his mouth lifted, you're still not afraid of me. Asterisk, I finally met his eyes. I'm afraid of losing you. The truth of it startled us both. From that moment on, there was no pretending this was temporary. Asterisk, the council grew restless. Power always did when it sensed change. They summoned Lucien repeatedly, testing him with veiled threats and thin smiles, searching for weakness. And when they realized I was no longer just an Omega guest but something far more dangerous, someone he loved, the pressure intensified. Asterisk, you shouldn't attend the council session, Lucien said the morning of the vote, fastening the cuff at his wrist. They'll try to provoke you. Asterisk, I stepped closer, smoothing the front of his coat, my hands steady. Let them try. I've spent my whole life being underestimated. Asterisk, he covered my hand with his, that's what frightens them most. Asterisk, the council chamber buzzed with tension. Stone walls echoed with murmured voices as the elders took their seats. When Lucien entered, the room fell silent. When I followed at his side, a ripple of shock moved through them like a wave. Asterisk, one of the elders leaned forward, eyes sharp. You bring the Omega again. Asterisk, I bring Alina, Lucien corrected calmly, and she stands by my authority. Asterisk, she has no rank, another snapped. No house. Asterisk, I lifted my chin. I have a voice. Asterisk, laughter followed, brittle and dismissive. It died quickly when Lucien's hand came down on the table, not hard, but with finality. Asterisk, she speaks with mine. Asterisk, the vote that followed was brutal. Accusations, old grievances, dragged into the light, questions about my past, my lineage, my worth. I answered each one without flinching, my voice steady even when my heart wasn't, and when it was over, when the final tally was read and Lucien's rule affirmed by a narrow margin, I realized my hands were shaking. Asterisk, Lucien noticed immediately. Asterisk, that night, he took me to the highest balcony in the palace, where the wind carried the scent of rain and distant pine. The city lights glittered below us like stars fallen to earth. Asterisk, you were extraordinary today, he said quietly. Asterisk, I was terrified. Asterisk, he turned to face me fully. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Alina. It's choosing what matters more. Asterisk, the space between us felt charged, intimate in a way that made my breath catch. And what matters more to you? I asked. Asterisk, his gaze softened, the steel giving way to something raw and unguarded. You. Asterisk, he didn't kiss me then. Instead, he rested his forehead against mine. Breathing me in like that alone was enough to sustain him. It was somehow more intimate than any touch could have been. Asterisk, the bond deepened after that, woven through small moments, shared meals, quiet laughter, arguments that ended in understanding instead of distance. I learned the weight of his responsibilities, the loneliness that came with command. He learned my fears, my scars, the way I sometimes doubted my own strength. Asterisk, and then, just when the palace began to feel safe, the truth surfaced. Asterisk, it came from an unexpected place, a servant girl, barely more than a whisper in the corridors, who slipped me a folded note with trembling hands. The seal was broken, the ink faded, but the message was clear. The first bond had not been broken by betrayal. It had been severed by order of the council. Asterisk, I confronted Lucien that night, the paper clenched in my fist. Asterisk, you knew? I asked, voice shaking. They made you believe it was her fault. His face went white. They told me she chose another, he said slowly, horror dawning as the pieces fell into place. That she broke the bond willingly. Asterisk, they lied, I whispered, and they would have done the same to me. Asterisk, the rage that followed was unlike anything I'd seen in him before. Not explosive, but cold and devastating. Controlled fury honed by years of restraint. By morning, he had a plan. The reckoning was swift. Evidence brought forward. Witnesses compelled to speak. The council fractured under the weight of its own secrets. When it was over, the elders responsible were stripped of power. Their influence shattered. Asterisk, Lucien didn't look triumphant. He looked free. The ceremony that followed was nothing like I'd imagined. No grand spectacle. No roaring crowd. Just us, standing in the ancient hall at dawn. Light streaming through stained glass as the old words were spoken. Asterisk, do you choose this bond? The officiant asked me. Asterisk, I didn't hesitate. I do. Asterisk, Lucien's voice was steady, but his eyes shone. I choose her. Always. Asterisk, when the bond sealed, it wasn't fire or lightning or anything dramatic. It was warmth. Belonging. A sense of rightness so deep it brought tears to my eyes. Asterisk, later. Alone at last, he drew me into his arms, holding me like something precious and irreplaceable. Asterisk, you once said you were afraid of what I wanted. He murmured into my hair. Asterisk, I smiled softly. And you said I was strong enough to survive you. Asterisk, he pulled back just enough to look at me. You didn't just survive me, Elena. You changed me. Asterisk, I rested my head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady, sure, real. Then we saved each other. Asterisk, years later, when the stories were told and retold, when bards sang of the Alpha King and his queen, of power balanced by compassion, of a realm reshaped by love, they always started with that one infamous line. Asterisk, you'd remember a night with me for the rest of your life. They were right, but the truth was far more beautiful. It wasn't a single night that defined us. It was every day we chose each other. After. Asterisk, the first winter we ruled together came early and harsh, blanketing the capital in snow so thick it muted the world into something softer, quieter. From the highest tower windows, the city looked like a dream suspended in white, chimneys breathing smoke into the pale sky, streets glowing amber at dusk. Asterisk, it was during that winter that I truly understood what it meant to be bound to an Alpha King. Asterisk, Lucien carried the weight of the realm in ways no crown could ever show. I saw it in the tightness of his shoulders when messengers arrived before dawn, in the way his jaw clenched when famine reports came in from the northern territories. In the nights, he lay awake beside me, staring into the dark as if sleep were a luxury he no longer deserved. Asterisk, I learned how to ground him. Asterisk, sometimes, it was as simple as sliding my hand into his, my thumb brushing slow, steady circles against his palm until his breathing evened out. Other times, it meant challenging him, refusing to let him drown himself in responsibility, reminding him he wasn't alone anymore. Asterisk, you don't have to carry everything. I told him one night as the fire crackled low and snow whispered against the windows. Let me carry you too. Asterisk, he turned toward me, eyes dark and intense. You already do. Asterisk, the bond between us, deepened in subtle ways, woven into instinct. I could feel his moods before he spoke them. He could sense when my doubts crept in, when old fears tried to resurface. We learned each other's silences as well as we knew each other's voices. Asterisk, but peace, I discovered, was not something the world allowed easily. Asterisk, the rebellion started quietly. Asterisk, a border lord in the east refused to pay tribute. A trade route was sabotaged. Whispers spread that the Alpha King had grown weak, that he'd been softened by an Omega Queen who had no noble blood to anchor her claim. Asterisk, they called me a liability. Asterisk, Lucien never repeated the words aloud, but I heard them anyway in the sharp intake of his breath when reports came in the way his hand tightened on the armrest of his chair. Asterisk, one night, after a particularly brutal council session, he came to our chambers without saying a word. He shut the door, crossed the room, and pulled me into his arms so hard I gasped. Asterisk, I need you, he said into my hair, voice rough, stripped bare of command. Asterisk, I wrapped myself around him without hesitation. I'm here. Asterisk, it wasn't desperation that drove us together that night. It was reassurance. The slow, reverent kind of intimacy built on trust and certainty. Every touch was deliberate, grounding us both in the reality of what we had chosen. Asterisk, afterward, as we lay tangled in the sheets, his heartbeat steady beneath my cheek, he spoke into the quiet. Asterisk, they'll come for you, he said. Not openly. Not yet. But they'll try to use you. Asterisk, I lifted my head, meeting his gaze. Then we'll be ready. Spring came with unrest. The Eastern Rebellion gained momentum, emboldened by foreign support. Lucien prepared for war with grim efficiency, issuing commands, mobilizing forces, setting strategies that spanned weeks and miles. I attended every briefing, every planning session, refusing to be sidelined. Asterisk. You're not a soldier, one general protested. Asterisk, no, I agreed calmly. I'm the queen. And this war affects my people too. Lucien watched me with something like pride in his eyes, when he rode out at the head of his army. The city gathered to see him off. I stood beside him on the palace steps, my hand clasped in his, my heart pounding with a fear I refused to show. Asterisk, I'll come back, he promised quietly, pressing his forehead to mine. Asterisk, I know, I said, even though the word tasted like a prayer. Asterisk, the weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Asterisk, messages arrived sporadically, carried by riders exhausted and bloodied. Victories came at a cost. Losses weighed heavy. At night, I sat alone in our chambers, feeling the bond stretch across distance, a thin, resilient thread that told me he was alive, that he was still fighting. Asterisk, then one night, the bond flared, blinding pain that dropped me to my knees. Asterisk, Lucien was hurt. I didn't wait for permission. I rode at dawn with a small guard, pushing through mud and rain toward the front lines. The camp was chaos when I arrived. Wounded soldiers shouted orders, the air thick with smoke and iron. They tried to stop me. I didn't let them. Asterisk, Lucien lay in the command tent, pale but conscious, a bandage soaked red at his side. His eyes snapped open when he sensed me. Asterisk, Alina, he breathed. You shouldn't. Asterisk, I know, I said, already at his side, gripping his hand. But I'm here. The relief that flooded his face nearly broke my heart. The attack that followed came at dusk. Asterisk, the rebels had tracked my arrival, had waited for the moment Lucien was most vulnerable. Their forces surged forward, aiming straight for the command tent. What happened next became legend. I didn't wield a sword. I didn't shout commands. I stood at Lucien's side, anchoring him through the bond, feeding him strength, clarity, resolve. Together, we moved like two halves of a single will, his strategies sharpened by my instincts, my fear burned away by his certainty. Asterisk, when the battle ended, the rebellion lay broken. Lucien survived. So did we. Asterisk, the return to the capital was quieter than the departure. The people lined the streets, not roaring this time, but watching with something deeper than awe, respect, gratitude, hope. Asterisk. They saw us not as an alpha king and his omega queen, but as rulers bound by something real. The years unfolded gently after that. We rebuilt the Eastern Territories together. We reformed the council, opening seats to voices long silenced. We fostered alliances not through fear, but through trust. Asterisk, and we found moments, small, precious moments just for us. Asterisk, mornings spent tangled in sheets while sunlight spilled across our skin. Late night conversations by the fire, sharing dreams that had nothing to do with crowns or politics. Quiet laughter over shared meals when the world felt far away. Asterisk, one evening, years later, Lucien took me back to the West Wing, the very room where everything had begun. Asterisk, you remember this place? He asked softly. Asterisk, I smiled. How could I forget? Asterisk, he knelt before me then, not as a king, but as the man I loved, holding out a small velvet box. Inside lay a ring etched with the ancient symbols of bond and choice. Asterisk, I chose you once, he said. I choose you still, every day. Asterisk, tears slipped down my cheeks as I pulled him up into my arms. And I will always choose you. They said our story started with a dangerous promise, whispered in a gilded hall, but that wasn't the truth. Asterisk. It started with two broken people standing on opposite sides of power and fear, daring to believe they could be more together than they ever were alone. Asterisk, and long after the songs faded, long after the palace stones bore the marks of time, one thing remained unshakable. We remembered. Not just one night, but a lifetime. Time did not rush us after that. It unfolded the way it always should have, slow, deliberate, rich with meaning. Asterisk the peace we built was not fragile, but it was alive, something that required tending. Lucian understood this instinctively. So did I. We ruled not from distance, but from presence. We traveled the realm together, not in grand processions meant to impress, but in quieter journeys that allowed us to see and be seen. Asterisk in the southern valleys, farmers brought us bread still warm from the ovens, and spoke of seasons finally turning kind again. In the mountain villages, elders studied us with shrewd eyes, measuring our bond not by ceremony but by the way Lucian listened when I spoke, by the way his hand found mine without thought. In the ports along the western coast, children laughed and chased each other around our guards, unafraid. That was when I understood the true power of an alpha king who did not rule alone. Lucian changed in those years, not by losing his edge, but by sharpening it into something purposeful. His authority no longer came from dominance alone, but from trust earned again and again. And I once the trembling Omega at the edge of the hall found, my voice echoing in rooms that would have swallowed me whole before. Asterisk still, there were nights when the past crept in. Asterisk Lucian would wake suddenly, breath ragged, eyes unfocused. I learned not to startle him. I would press my palm to his chest, steady and warm, grounding him back in the present. Asterisk, you're here. I would whisper, I'm here. Asterisk sometimes he spoke of the first bond, then not with anger, but with sorrow, not just for what was taken from him, but for the man he had been before. Loss hardened him. Asterisk, I thought loving meant surrender. He told me once, staring into the dying embers of the fire. I didn't know it could mean strength. Asterisk, I rested my head against his shoulder. We weren't meant to learn gently. Asterisk no, he agreed quietly, but we learned. The realm learned too. Years passed, and the whispers that once followed me Omega, liability, weakness faded into something else entirely. They called me the steady queen, the bridge, the heart of the crown. Titles I never asked for, but accepted with humility. Asterisk, and yet, the greatest test of our bond came not from rebellion or politics, but from something far more intimate. It began with silence. Lucian grew withdrawn in small ways at first. Longer hours alone, a distant look in his eyes when he thought I wasn't watching. The bond didn't weaken, but it shifted, like a note held too long. Asterisk, I didn't confront him right away. Love had taught me patience. Asterisk, but one evening, as rain traced slow paths down the tall windows of our chambers, I finally spoke. Asterisk, you're carrying something, I said softly, and you're shutting me out? He didn't deny it. I'm afraid, he admitted, voice low, and I don't know how to be afraid anymore without becoming dangerous. Asterisk, I took his hands, forcing him to look at me. Afraid of what? Asterisk he swallowed. Of losing you, of failing you, of becoming the man I was before I knew better. The confession cracked something open between us. You don't have to be perfect, I said. You just have to be honest. With me. Asterisk he nodded slowly, breath shaking. There is a child, he said. The words didn't land all at once. A child, I echoed. Asterisk mine, he clarified. Pain etched into every line of his face. From before, I didn't know. The council hid her existence the same way they hid the truth about my bond. She was sent away, protected, hidden. My heart stuttered, then steadied. She's alive. Asterisk, yes, and she's been found. By enemies. The threat was clear without being spoken. A child with royal blood was leverage of the most dangerous kind. Asterisk, I felt fear, sharp and cold, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. Then we bring her home, I said. Asterisk, Lucian stared at me, disbelief flickering across his features. Alina asterisk, she's your blood, I continued, and that makes her my family too. Asterisk, the journey to retrieve her was long and fraught with danger, but it was not marked by violence. When we found her, she was wary, guarded. Her gray eyes so much like Lucian's it stole my breath. She studied us like a cornered animal. You're not my king, she said flatly to Lucian. And you're not my queen? Asterisk, no, Lucian agreed gently, lowering himself to one knee. I'm your father, if you want me. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then she looked at me. You chose him, she said. Yes, I replied. Every day. Something shifted then, not trust yet, but curiosity. She came home with us. Asterisk, the adjustment was not easy. She tested boundaries, pushed against authority, rejected affection with sharp words and sharper silences. Lucian struggled most of all, torn between giving her space and aching to make up for years stolen from them both. Asterisk, I became the bridge again. Not by force, but by presence. Asterisk, I listened to her stories, sat with her in silence, let her decide when closeness was allowed, and slowly, so slowly it worked. Asterisk, the night she finally called Lucian father. He wept without shame. Asterisk, our family became something unconventional, layered with past wounds and new beginnings, but it was real. Asterisk, and in the quiet that followed that healing, something else bloomed. Asterisk, I realized I was with child on a morning drenched in sunlight. The palace hushed in that rare, perfect stillness. The bond flared, not alarm, not pain, but joy so overwhelming I had to sit down. Asterisk, when I told Lucian, he didn't speak at first. He simply knelt in front of me, pressing his forehead to my stomach as if grounding himself in the truth of it. I swear, he whispered, voice thick, they will never doubt that they are loved. Asterisk, years later, many years later, when silver-threaded Lucian's hair and laughter lined the corners of my eyes, we stood once more on the balcony overlooking the city. Asterisk, the realm thrived. Our children did too. The crown was lighter now, shaped by time and shared strength. Asterisk, Lucian slipped his arm around my waist, resting his chin atop my head. Do you remember the first thing I ever said to you? Asterisk, I smiled. How could I forget? You'd remember a night with me for the rest of your life, he repeated softly. I turned in his arms, meeting his gaze. You were wrong. Asterisk, his brow furrowed. I was. Asterisk, yes, I said, rising on my toes to kiss him. I didn't remember a night. Asterisk, I rested my forehead against his, breath warm, steady. Sure. Asterisk, I remembered a lifetime. Asterisk, and in that moment surrounded by love we had chosen, fought for, and built together, knew with absolute certainty that nothing had ever been truer. Asterisk, the years slowed as if the world itself understood that some stories deserve to be savored. Asterisk, our children grew beneath the steady rhythm of a kingdom at peace. The palace that once echoed with intrigue and whispered threats now rang with laughter. Arguments over nothing, footsteps racing down corridors that had once known only careful restraint. Lucian watched it all with a quiet wonder that never quite faded, as though part of him was still amazed this life was real. Asterisk, there were fleeting moments that became my favorites. Asterisk, Lucian teaching our son how to ride at dawn, his voice firm but patient, pride softening his every correction. Our daughter curled against my side during council meetings, half asleep, utterly unimpressed by titles or power. The way Lucian would find my hand across crowded rooms, grounding himself without even realizing he was doing it. Asterisk, love, I learned, wasn't loud. It was constant. One evening, long after the children had grown and begun carving paths of their own, Lucian took me back to the royal gardens. Lanterns glowed softly along the stone paths, illuminating flowers that bloomed only at night, pale and luminous under the moonlight. Asterisk, you remember the first time we walked here? He asked. Asterisk, I smiled. I was convinced you were manipulating me. Asterisk, I was, he admitted with a quiet laugh, just not in the way you thought. Asterisk, we stopped beside the reflecting pool, the water so still it mirrored the stars perfectly. Time had etched itself into us gently. His hair was threaded with silver now. My face bore the soft lines of laughter and tears lived fully. Asterisk, yet, when he looked at me, the intensity was still there, still unmistakable. Asterisk, I used to think power was about control, he said, about standing above everyone else. Asterisk, and now? I asked. Asterisk, now I know, it's about choosing who you stand beside. Asterisk, he reached for me, slow and familiar, his hands resting at my waist like they had belonged there all along. The bond between us pulsed, softly, not urgent, not demanding, simply present. Asterisk, I once told you that you'd remember a night with me for the rest of your life, he murmured. Asterisk, I laughed quietly. You really like reminding me when you were arrogant. Asterisk, no, he said, shaking his head. I like reminding myself how wrong I was. Asterisk, he brushed his thumb along my cheek, reverent, because I didn't give you a single unforgettable night. You gave me thousands, I said softly. We stood there for a long time, wrapped in the hush of the garden, the distant sounds of the city drifting up like a lullaby. The kingdom no longer needed constant vigilance. It breathed easily now, shaped by years of compassion layered over strength. Asterisk, eventually, Lucian spoke again, his voice lower, more intimate. Asterisk, if history remembers me, he said, I hope it's not for the wars or the crown. Asterisk, I tilted my head. What do you hope they remember? Asterisk, that I learned, he said, that I loved well, that I chose you. Asterisk, emotion tightened my throat. They will, but history was never the part that mattered most to me. What mattered was this waking up beside him every morning, even when our bodies were slower, even when the world felt uncertain again in new ways. What mattered was knowing that fear had once ruled us both, and love had taught us how to be brave. Asterisk. When the end eventually came, as it does for all things, it did not come as tragedy. Asterisk. Lucien held my hand, his grip still strong, his eyes still clear. The bond hummed softly between us, steady as it had always been. Asterisk. You were my beginning, he whispered, and my home. Asterisk. I pressed my forehead to his, tears slipping free. We found each other. And we had. Not because fate demanded it, asterisk, but because we chose it again and again, through fear and fire and quiet days that mattered just as much as the dramatic ones. Asterisk. So if you ever hear our story told, if someone whispers of an alpha king and an omega who changed a realm, remember this. Love isn't the moment that steals your breath. It's the lifetime that gives it back. Asterisk. And that. Asterisk. That is what lasts forever.